Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Strife's Sanctum with your host, Citizen Strife. It's another Tuesday morning. It's been a couple of weeks since I've actually recorded because I did East 8 on a Thursday, so I took a week off and tried to focus in on what I was going to do going forward, one of those being trying to get guests lined up. I wanted to try something different, wanted to, see if I could talk with people and learn about games from their perspective and kind of bounce things off them. When I tried to speak with them, it turns out it wasn't as easy as I thought. Our method of doing it was trying to do things through Discord. Turns out that even though I have a Rode Procaster microphone and I think it sounds really, really good on anybody else's end through Discord, which is our easiest method of getting this done, it's this weird crackling noise, and it could be gain, it could just be a processing issue, whatever. I figured until that gets resolved, I'm just going to go about my own business the way I have been. As much as I would like to have guests involved, I also feel it is a burden on them too to listen to weird crackling and static noises for over an hour, because it's fine on my recording end. The issue was people listening to me trying to interview them. I don't want to subject any potential guest to that problem until it potentially gets fixed. If it does, then I could consider having guests on. But for right now, the best thing to do is, go about my merry way and keep going how I'm going to do it. And one of those ways of doing that was actually trying to expand the games and anime lists that I've been doing. Now, anime is not a problem because I've got like 3 or 4 different subscriptions. I've got Netflix, I've got Verve, which includes Crunchyroll and High Dive, and then Funimation. So I'm pretty well set in that regard. But video games was becoming a bit of a difficult thing for me because my sole interest was Japanese RPGs. But then I realized, why not focus in on other Japanese games that I may have missed in my life, like some of the Nintendo 64 Zelda and Mario games. I mean, I played, Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time and such, but I never did stuff like Super Mario 64. I never played stuff like Resident Evil, or I gave up on those like first or second games in or whatever. I haven't played Mega Man's in forever. You can kind of get my point. Because not just then as a retro player, but now as a person playing PS4 and Nintendo Switch, I realized there's a lot of fertile ground that Japanese games cover that don't get under that RPG label that I'm ignoring because I have a singular focus. So I've decided to get Gamefly again. And for those who don't know, Gamefly is a subscription service that sends games. It's how the old Netflix system used to send DVDs, but with video game rentals. And man, I used to use it a ton. I think after a while I gave up on it, and then I'm back on it, and I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. It works perfect for me because now I get to experiment with some games that I hadn't played before, like Sonic Colors Ultimate Edition. I believe that's what it's called. I would never really play Sonic if it weren't for, easy access or those old school platformers that I lost, favor with just because I went so far down the RPG rabbit hole that I've kind of neglected that side. Or even playing something like a Devil May Cry or a Bayonetta, things that I don't really do all that much, or No More Heroes. You can see where that would be fertile ground to review or even do a playthrough on or do a stream, because it's all encompassing on a Japanese umbrella. This channel should be all about how I handle Japanese culture through the lens of video games and anime and other forms too. So my fandom shouldn't just be sectioned off to one thing. I don't know how successful that's going to be, but it's not really a major cost to me. It was like $15 for one game. One game through. But I'll worry about that when I get it because I'm working through Tales of Arise. I will save more thoughts for Tales of Arise when I actually do the review of Tales of Berseria next week, but man, am I initially impressed. There's a lot of hype surrounding Tales of Arise, as it should be, because this is the first PS4, and it's going to be the last PS4 into the PS5 game that... Because Tales of Berseria felt like a PS3 game that upscaled to PS4, that sort of thing. I think they were PS3 style games uploaded to PS4 or upgraded. This one certainly feels like the first PS4 or PS5 Tales game. The environments are gorgeous. The characters are well grounded. It feels like a mixture of all the Tales games that you used to play, specifically Berseria on my end, because that's the one I have most familiarity with a lot of like those modern or early to mid Final Fantasies like 7. You've got aspects of 12, especially in the environmental design and some of the ideas and at play. But then a lot of the combat mixes in some elements of Final Fantasy VII Remake. It doesn't completely rip them off though, which is nice because it's its own game. It's its own vibe, it's its own feel, but it's a down-to-earth, very, I'd say darker, not brooding, but darker and mature-sounding Tales game to me. Sometimes it gets up into its own comedy way too much. This one is kind of a nice counterbalance, veering towards the more serious side. So if you're looking for a very serious game, or if you've never tried a Tales game before, this is definitely a good start for me. And I don't know if it's going to end up beating Berseria as my favorite, but I'm pleasantly hopeful, and it certainly seems like the reviews are striking as well. So I'm advertising it wherever I can to people who may have not played it. I've noticed a lot of people who watch my stuff say, "Oh my god, I heard of that, but I never played that." That happens with, I'd say, Yakuza more than anything. When I played Yakuza Like a Dragon, which I will play on YouTube and review as well, I again stress that I'm not alone. I'm new to the YouTube thing, relatively, but I still think that my skewing towards Japanese games is not in the mainstream. It is not. But there are a lot of games or shows that people may not have heard of, and I have to go and say, well, how do I approach talking about a subject? How do I approach giving somebody an interesting time? Because they were into Mario, or they were into Zelda, or they were into those retro Japanese games, or they were into Sonic or whatever. Where's that gap between, oh, well, maybe you played a Final Fantasy game, but try this one instead? That's kind of how I approached East last week. Was I basically just said, it's my favorite. And here's why. I spent like an hour gushing over East 8, right? But again, that's coming from the perspective of a person who plays RPGs for a living and spent 20-some years doing nothing but. So somebody bridging the gap of not playing that, it's the same thing. And I believe that also ties into today's topic of anime in general, especially ones that are very Japanese-centric. Some anime, like say Cowboy Bebop or Trigun or Black Lagoon, or even something like a Big O, which has Batman influence, right? You can kind of tell somebody it's like this thing you might have seen, because that's the best way you bridge a gap and explain something to somebody, is how something is like something else. It's a relation point, a just jumping off point for something. With something like Mushi-Shi, there really isn't anything like it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not good. What it means is you have to kind of know where this show is coming from, but also know what stuff in Japan is like, more so than what Mushi-Shi itself is about. And I rewatched it about a month ago, and I took some time over the last week to familiarize myself. There we go. That's the word. See how that works. With some of the episodes again, because this isn't going to be an overarching review of the show. It doesn't follow the same plot structure that a normal, like 12 to 24 show series, much less a 100 or 200 episode show would be. It's very episodic, so you could jump to any episode and kind of get the same feel. So the way I'm going to go about it is actually describe some of the things about Japanese culture and like religion and ephemeral paranormal kind of vibes that's present in the show, and then talk about certain episodes that I think struck me. Because the thing about Mushi-Shi is you can pick an episode and pick its story and be like, okay, I am into this one, but not really into this one instead. How many of them really catch me? How many of them really have a story, like a B C follow through that I can really get behind? So I picked about 5 or 10 of them, and I'll talk about them in short order. I don't know how long this podcast is going to be. I don't expect it to be that long, honestly, but enough that if people were to watch Mushi-Shi, they understood why I would be interested in it. The first thing I do want to mention again is it is episodic. There aren't too many characters. There's only like 3 characters overall that really stand to stick the entire show. If I'm being honest, 1. But it can help in a way. The best way I would describe it would be very chill and more of an adventure drama, but a paranormal one at that. You're following this guy to a place to see these things unfold, and he wants to see these things unfold. But when he gets there, he realizes, okay, this is more of a dramatic show. This is like, what is happening to these people in this town, or what is happening to this person in this forest or something? This being. What is a mushi? And that's the tipping point. A mushi is its own thing. A mushi, as the show describes it, would be not necessarily a ghost or a life form. It's almost like an atom or a one of those smaller minuscule life forms, or just ephemeral. That's the best way I can describe it, is an ephemeral sort of life form. It exists to exist. It exists to fulfill a purpose, which, again, doesn't make it malevolent or benevolent. It just exists to exist. And they come in many forms, and they come in many disguises, and they do different things based on what the episode is trying to do. And some of them hurt people or hurt towns or whatnot, and some don't. Or some just exist because they're trying to subsist parasitically off of people. Again, that doesn't make them malevolent, and that's what the main character Ginkgo is trying to describe to people. It's kind of like a moral dilemma in a way. These beings exist to exist. They don't exist to harm people unless it accidentally does that. So, it's just living through people. It's like, does it hurt the person involved, or does it, that's the sort of thing the show wrestles with. Is it's a moral dilemma on the people being afflicted with these things. Ginkgo trying to tell them, hey, listen to what I'm saying, or don't. And then watch unfold, because he's always traveling and he's always doing things. So they exist in this weird, not alternate dimension, but also, it's sort of alternate, not quite. That's the bridge, of the gap you have to mentally get past, I think, is it's not specifically a religious show. It's not specifically a paranormal show. It's not specifically about, I would say, Japanese demons or what they call yokai, right? You'll see a couple of shows here and there, or if you've ever heard of Yokai Watch, it's probably the more mainstream version, like a Pokemon version of yokai, right? That's not exactly what they are, but it's kind of exploring that same vibe, because in Japan you have this sense of everything has a soul and everything has a meaning and everything should be um, revered in a way. It's their religion is Shintoism. Now they have aspects of Buddhism that they got from China and India, of course. So you have this multi-layered, multicultural idea of you have these demons that exist, you have these cultures that exist, you have this reverence for the land and its people and all of the trees and wind and grass and things. But then in this show, you have this idea that these little like monsters, so to speak, exist that nobody can see except a few, and they are just existing to exist. They do things that don't fit the natural order of life and they cause problems for people. And I'll go into the specifics of how each one kind of exists. And it's going to be kind of spoilery, but not too bad. Again, I wanted to get that across first because I didn't want to start explaining things without explaining who the character was and why he's doing the thing. Because if you're going to watch an episode, you'd be like, okay, what am I seeing? The benefit of this show being episodic is that you can pick an episode and be like, okay, I like what's going on with these characters and I see what the show is trying to do. So let me get invested into the music, into the story, into the drama, into the character and how he interacts with these things. So that's where the show really shines. You can jump to whatever you want to jump to. You don't have to watch all 20 or 26 episodes of it. You can watch maybe 2 or 3. You can watch only the ones I'm suggesting. You don't have to have a plot point. You just have to understand what the show is and then dive into it, if that is for you. As I mentioned before, the characters themselves, there are very few. The main character is Ginkgo. In the dub version, which I watched, he's voiced by Travis Willingham, who was Roy Mustang from Full Metal Alchemist. That's the role he's known most for. But Travis tends to bring a very subdued but authoritative voice to this character, who's a nice guy, but is trying to just tell people, hey, I know more about this subject than you. His lifestyle is he is what is known as a Mushi master. Think of those wandering priests or wandering bards or wandering adventurers. He's a wandering Mushi master. He travels to understand these things because to him, these things are around him every day. So he carries this trusty package of like all these little herbs and medicines and warding things, almost like a priest would. And he knows all of this stuff. He understands all this stuff because they follow him around because he can attract them. So he takes this cigarette, I guess, and the smoke, it's like this special smoke that kind of stops them from bothering him while he's traveling. So his whole goal is to go to a place per episode and just tell people, okay, I know what's going on. You have to trust me. So let me figure out what's going on. And some of them do, some of them don't. And the people who are, because they're desperate, they're having issues with their lives and they don't understand it. And this guy comes in and he's like, well, I know the answer to this. You have to understand what I'm telling you. That's the moral dilemma, is you have people who are too frantic to follow his advice, and then he comes back 6 months later or whatever, because they do time lapses and things. And shit goes south, or shit gets better, or whatever, and he works through these, whether he's successful or not. So every episode is Ginkgo trying to alleviate the issues of the people or the town that these Mushi are infesting and move on. Some are successful, some are not. Later on in the show, we get a backstory about Ginkgo through the eyes of a second Mushi master known as Nui. She also is sort of the narrator, but sort of not. But you hear her at the beginning and the end of episodes all the time because she was the one that found him as a kid and basically raised him to understand what the hell is going on with these Mushi and things. So she shows up for an episode or two and then does all these backdrop things as a narrator to give the viewer something to go off of. I'll explain her role when I get to the episode particularly, but she's a secondary character and plays a big role in it because she developed Ginkgo's character going forward. And the only other character of note would be Adashino, voiced by Chuck Huber. I forget. Chuck's been in a lot of Funimation stuff forever, but trying to remember. Yeah, Shao Tucker from Fullmetal Alchemist. Again, I'm trying to use Fullmetal Alchemist because that's what most people would have seen. But he's been in God knows how much stuff. But Adashino's character is kind of a merchant. He finds these little trinkets and little items that maybe Mushi have been infected or caused problems by, and he sells them off for profit. And, sometimes that gets him in trouble. And Ginkgo is his friend and all, and they're drinking buddies of sorts. But, Ginkgo just sits there and laughs at him sometimes. He's like, "You're an idiot. You don't understand what you're selling, and you don't understand who you're selling it to, and I have to clean up your fucking messes." So you have every 5 or 6 episodes or so Ginkgo and Adashino bickering back and forth because Adashino's trying to make a quick buck off of people's not understanding how dangerous these things are to him. So Ginkgo has to save the day. Ginkgo's the super nice guy. Adashino's the merchant guy who just wants to make a quick buck. And just getting a quick drink of water. All right. And as I said, this show doesn't have a crazy amount of plot to go with it. So what is its draw other than every episode is different and every episode has a different monster of the week sort of vibe? Well, it's set in a kind of pseudo medieval Japanese era, say 1800s, 1700s, that sort of thing. There's technology involved, but it's not really important. It's more about rural Japan and that kind of aesthetic. So if you like the whole Eastern style architecture and Eastern style like medieval dramas and stuff like that, you kind of understand where it's coming from. It's not this is set in a school, this is set in modern Japan. No, this is set in a very rustic medieval Japanese setting. So it gets you into that period piece mindset right away. The show is very slow, but not like at a snail's pace. It's meant to be, we're following along and stuff is happening, but there's drama involved. There's action, but it tends to just be subdued. It's one of those kinds of shows where you tune in and you don't zone out, but you understand why things happen, not that things are happening. So you hear a lot of like softer music, like pianos and maybe some drums and just a lot of unique instrumentation. When it gets hectic, then you maybe get some, I guess what you would call battle scenes or action scenes. They happen here and there, but those are mostly one or two big scenes in the midst of this dramatic show. So don't go in expecting a lot of action, mostly just drama. The big picture, again, is the moral dilemmas that you suffer through. Some of these have a lot of quandaries in them. Would you save a town at the cost of yourself? Would you let someone die to let the Mushi die too? That sort of thing. Or are you confident in the knowledge that you can combat this issue and deal with your plight? And that's what Ginkgo, his role as the observer, has to do, is like, I will help you if you want me to, but I'm not going to force you to get help unless there's no answer. Because he's a good guy. He wants to help these people solve their problems, but if they're too stupid or too narrow-minded to not accept it, well, sucks to be them, I guess. And that's where all these episodes kind of dive into things. And I picked a series of episodes, and I'll describe them without like giving away what the plot is, or give away the ending. That's the best thing I can do is describe kind of how each episode that I was big on progresses, and then you can decide for yourself if this is the kind of show that you would be interested in, because this isn't going to be every episode. First one would be known as episode 2, Light of the Eyelid. So a big concept in the show is this river of light that exists when you close your eyes. This river of light that exists in I guess a dream state where a lot of the Mushi live or Mushi exist. You don't see it, you don't perceive it, but if you look at it too long, you actually lose your eyesight, because a thing that exists in that river of light can infect you and infect your actual eyesight. So a girl is infected and is permanently blinded, and a kid that takes pity on her tries to help her out, and then he ends up getting infected as well. So Ginkgo shows up, and, well, he has to figure out, well, here's how you deal with this river of light. And he talks to the girl and to the boy as well, because they're the main characters of it. So the idea is very ephemeral in nature, but it's a very serious issue. Those two, like, there's another episode immediately after it where instead of eyesight, a person loses their hearing, or their hearing is like, it's almost like this insane tinnitus, like in their head. They can't stop this ringing in their ears, and they find out it's a Mushi that's the cause of it. So 2 episodes give like physical problems, like physical disabilities, full on blindness, from the sense that it's not that the eyes themselves are blind, it's that the monsters themselves ate their eyeballs, or they're eating the sound that comes out of their ears, that sort of thing. The next episode is Pillow Pathway. A guy in a town realizes he's a bit of an oracle, and what he dreams ends up coming true. Some of it is nice, like helping the town and whatnot. Others are very serious, like floods and bad harvests and things like that. So Ginkgo comes along and is trying to figure out what's going on with him. He does the time skip situation and then realizes that it gets worse. The guy is dependent upon these dreams, but it gets kind of driven nuts by the fact that he's dreaming. So Ginkgo figures out what's going on, and then again, the character involved has to decide, how serious of a problem is this? How serious of a problem are these dreams? Well, it causes a lot of trouble for the town in serious, debilitating ways, because he keeps dreaming of these things, and the Mushi keep making what is fake in his dream world a reality in real life. They end up figuring out how later on, but again, it's a neat trick to figure out how the Mushi are even able to interact with this person's dreams. A few episodes later, you have something known as the Heavy Seed. So a town suffers bad harvests each year, but there is a seed that can be planted inside a human being, and it's underneath their tongue. The problem is the seed itself can give you a year's harvest in no time flat. It's a miracle seed. It's like those magic beans in Zelda or something, except an entire field of food, right? The drawback becomes if you use it, the next seed shows up in whoever is the weakest person in the village. So that becomes a moral quandary. Are you willing to sacrifice a person in your town, or are you willing to sacrifice yourself in order to feed a village that is on the brink of death? Another episode is The White Lives in the Inkstone. And again, this is kind of a Japanese-centric one, sure. Inkstones are the way that calligraphy, old school calligraphy was. Like, think of like pens and quivers in like, English TV shows and stuff, like the old school TVs. Instead of like pen and ink, you'd have a stone made of ink. right? You would rub like this carved piece of stone on an ink stone, and it would rub and rub and rub, and then you would have some ink, and then you could make a Japanese letter or something. The trick with this is that when somebody made this ink stone and people were using it and getting some ink, it turns out Mushi were living inside it, and they started infecting the kids. And this is where Adashino got in trouble. He bought this inkstone not knowing that if you rub the inkstone, this clump of Mushi would infect the kids or infect who was around and actually lower their body temperature and basically give them hypothermia. So Ginkgo has to come and save the day because Adashino didn't know jack shit. He has to find who created the inkstone, figure out why this is happening, and then save the children before it's too late because they are suffering severe chill and almost dead. Episode 12, the one-eyed fish, is where Nui appears, and this is where Ginkgo and his backstory come into play. Nui is a Mushi master herself, but she decides to live on her own, not travel, which you can do. Some other people just live in mountains and such, but Nui takes care of Ginkgo, mostly begrudgingly, because he's just a kid who sprained his ankle and whatever, but he learns what is going on. I think it was one of those things where Ginkgo lost his mother fairly young and then realized that Nui was kind of a mother figure to him, begrudgingly again. So you have that dynamic of how does he learn about Mushi, but how does he interact with Nui to the point where that he's become this main character that we've dealt with. So it's very weird in the sense that they spend 10 episodes giving you Ginkgo's travels and journeys, and then they decide to throw in, well, here's his backstory, here's why he's like this. So they waited quite a while to give you a backstory for the guy. One Night Bridge is an interesting idea because this couple is like star-crossed lovers. This guy falls in love with this girl who may or may not be like a, for lack of a better term, like an elder's kid or something, like a king's kid or something. Think of that. It's the princess and the the Romeo and Juliet kind of thing or whatever. She is proposed to an arranged marriage to some other guy. This dude, who's the main character of this episode, says, no, this is bullshit. We got to get out of here. Let's cross the bridge. We find that the bridge itself is disrepair, so what they actually end up doing is finding a bridge made of Mushi. So for whatever reason, Mushi are creating this bridge, and the girl falls. And then for the next 3 to 6 months, she is practically comatose, for lack of a better term. And the guy is at fault, and Ginkgo finds his way to this village, and then, weird shenanigans come around and such. And you have to figure out, well, why is this girl in this weird comatose state? What is this like weird arranged marriage bullshit gonna have problems with? What is this one night bridge thing? So it's a big old mystery for the entire episode. And it's kind of cool how they actually resolve it and how Ginkgo explains why things went wrong the first time they tried to cross the bridge and why it didn't work the second time either. The next episode is known as Sunrise Serpent. This woman gets infected by Mushi and it affects her memories. So what it ends up doing is the Mushi inside her brain take away the memories of things that she doesn't do very well or doesn't do very often. So her kid has to figure out, how do I manage this woman who is not only my mother and my only, parent, because apparently my dad is gone, so you have that issue on side of it. You have Ginkgo coming around and telling you what's going on. The idea is that the Mushi have infected her brain, and it's taking away memories of tasks that she has let go, or things that don't really matter in the day-to-day life, and it could affect her super, super quickly. So it's a nice nod to a real life concern, which is Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I worked in a dementia ward for a while as a volunteer, and to no uncertain terms, Alzheimer's disease and dementia are some of the worst afflictions you can suffer. It really changes a person's life, and it's really an impact on the people around them. So, Sunrise Serpent as an episode is a kind of bouncing off point for how a person would deal with those kinds of situations in this fantastical setting, no less. Sure, but it is a nod to something that is fairly serious and can mileage may vary on how affected you are and that sort of thing, but that's one of the episodes that I think really would speak to somebody because it's a real life problem that they tackle in this fantastical way. So I wouldn't say it was my favorite, but it's certainly one that I would check out more than anything. One of my favorite episodes, though, is known as Sea of Writings. And this is because this is actually one of the times that Ginkgo gets to interact mostly with characters that he knew. Kind of like Adashino, but the idea is that Ginkgo's not the only Mushi master in the world. So this place exists, this library, this underground, compendium of all of this like encyclopedic knowledge of what are these Mushi, how do you fight them, or how do you interact with them, what do they do. These people, this older woman and then this girl, spend every hour of every day compiling these like handwritten lists, these scrolls. It's a treasure trove of knowledge, basically like a gigantic underground library. And they will allow you to read from the library as long as you give them more stories to write. The drawback is that the girl is suffering from a cursed appendage. Her foot doesn't work because it's cursed through a lineage problem. So the Mushi has infected her body. She can't move or she can't walk properly. So she spends most of her time just writing or listening to stories. So Ginkgo and the girl, I believe her name is Tamu, she kind of gets romantically involved with him. It's subtle, sure, but you can tell that like they like each other a lot. So you've got that kind of subplot going. You've got the subplot of what are these like compendiums. Like Ginkgo is like just full bore into this idea. The writings themselves are actually living things. The Mushi themselves are inside all of the scrolls. So as he's reading them, the scrolls themselves are coming to life and they're trying to escape, and then they find out that they could be a problem if they escape, right? So you have that. That episode is one of my favorites. I just like the dynamic between the main character and Ginkgo of that episode. So it's like it's really fun. The last episode I want to talk about is again another very serious one. It's known as Cotton Changeling. This group of I'd say a mother and a father start raising these kids, and nothing goes wrong. You know, they have some children, but after a while, they start realizing that all of the kids tend to look the same. They grow older, sure. So some of them are older, some of them are younger, you know, toddlers to like 3 years old and 5 years old, stuff like that. But they all kind of share the same appearance. They all end up kind of saying things to each other, which is strange enough. But then what you find out is they actually start dying off. And then Ginkgo shows up, knowing that these distraught parents are losing their children through whatever means. These children that all look the same and all feel the same and whatever. Despite the fact that it's an eerie setup, they still love their children because, I mean, why wouldn't they, right? But Ginkgo has to tell them that something is going on that is Mushi related, and he wants them to kill their children, not wait them out, not stop the infest, and actually murder their children. For better or for worse, his solution for these people is, I want you to get rid of them now, because it's just going to cause problems later. And it's really sad because, yeah, you realize that these Mushi that infect these things are really realizing, oh shit, something's going to go wrong. This guy is trying to murder us. And I've said before that this show isn't like either action heavy or mood heavy, but then you get episodes like this, or you get episodes like Sunrise Serpent that really tackle actual issues of how do you deal with children that are having issues in their lives, or how do you deal with somebody who has a dementia problem, or whatever it may be. Getting back to the main point of Mushi-Shi is, it's not about the monsters themselves and what they're doing. That has an aspect of it, but it's also about how do the people respond to what is going around them, because sometimes they can't see these beings infecting them, so they assume that they're suffering from disorders, they're suffering from physical ailments, they're not suffering from something is infecting me, I have to get it out of me. So Ginkgo is the one that has to be the voice of reason, and the key to this show is seeing that moral dilemma play out for that 20-minute episode and then moving on to the next one. So this show is a fun little experience of that medieval setting, a nice subdued aura of music and ambiance, a good main character who drives the narrative as a through point for all these episodes, but you also get to see this weird paranormal vibe, especially coming up on something like a Halloween, or if you're fascinated at all with the paranormal in any sense, this is a show that I think would speak to you for many different reasons. I found myself enjoying it quite a bit for many different reasons. Again, I think it's a great Halloween, like I put it on for a week and have fun, during October sort of situation, if that's something you'd enjoy. I don't think it's the best show in the world, but I think it's gonna be something that you'll remember, because those episodes, specifically if they speak to you or have a backdrop in what you have experienced in your life, I think you will get something out of this show, and I think it would be a fun experience to try it. But that'll do it for me. And let's see. Going forward, because of the situation with the guests not working out, I'm going to double back and get some episodes in that I wanted to get done before. I do have a plan of what the next 3 episodes are going to be. So next week we're going to get back into Tales of Berseria. I wanted to do that with a guest. Again, can't really do that for now, but it actually works out because I have some background in Tales of Arise. I don't think I'll be able to beat Tales of Arise in a week or so, but I will be able to play a lot more of it and give you my thoughts on it, and just talk about Tales of Berseria in general. And I have a lot to talk about. That game, to that point, was my favorite Tales game. I don't know if Arise is going to be better overall, but I'm intrigued. So next week is Tales heavy. The week after that will be another anime. It'll be known as Land of the Lustrous. Haven't watched that show in a couple of years, but just aesthetically, much less a story, it is a hell of a trip. The visuals in that show are amazing. So after we do Land of the Lustrous, we'll get into October, I believe, and then we'll do Super Mario RPG. After that point, I'm going to start filtering in things like going to an anime convention and talking about what happened at the convention, or I'm going to talk about, in the future, I'm going to do an episode on Cowboy Bebop, the anime, versus Cowboy Bebop, the live action, because that's going to be in like November. and then later on it's going to be Matrix 4 is going to come out, so I have an episode planned about the Animatrix, the anime compilation of the Matrix from about 25 years ago. So I have a lot of that stuff to look forward to. Again, I'm going to try and filter in non-Japanese RPGs, stuff like Mario, stuff like Zelda, Metroid, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, No More Heroes, things that don't fit the RPG bill. But, eventually I'll get back into things like Final Fantasy, Persona. I've kept those at my beck and call for when I need them, But I do want to I do want to expand this podcast to be about more than just RPGs. So I'll try to do that more often, and we'll see how it goes. Again, I hope people are enjoying these podcasts. Let me know what you think. I'm going to try and get better at them as I go along. I feel better the more I do it, and I just want people to say, "Hey, I never heard of that thing before, but I think I'm interested in that. I want to try that someday." And if this stuff is for you, that's all I can ask for. But that's it for me today. I will see you guys next week, or I'll see you in the videos next time, because I keep on going with Persona, and we're going to keep on going with Persona 5 for a long, long time. So, in whatever fashion you've been watching my content, if you've been enjoying it, please like, share, or subscribe. Please comment. I've really enjoyed doing all this stuff and, expressing my love for this culture and all the games and shows that have influenced me in my life. And hopefully even a little of that is coming across. But until next time, it's Citizen Strife signing off.